It's a collection of authentic spoken or written samples of language in use. So at some point, what you see in a corpus has been used by a human being somewhere else to do something. We looked at frequency as being important. From half a century ago, more than half a century ago, from studies of linguistics, we know how important it is for a meaning of a word to be affected by the company it keeps in other words. We also looked at some of the tools of analysis for corpus-based work. We looked at word lists, keywords, and concordances. What we also looked at, or what we began to talk about, was thinking about different types of corpus-based studies. And so on the one hand, you can have a corpus study where it's very much the corpus, the design, the collection, the analysis, often very much associated with language and use and linguistic study. The corpus is the primary instrument, if you like, or the main source of investigation, or the main purpose of the investigation. We also had a look at something that's not quite so heavily corpus-based. We had a look at how we can use corpus methods to aid us in our text analysis. So there we looked at analysing focus group interviews, so interviews with young people, and being able to analyse quite a lot of them all at once, being able to compare them at once, and being able to use that automatic processing, the automatic analysis, to direct our further, more deeper, fine-grained analysis into the issues that we are interested in. One of the, or actually three of the things that we had aimed to look at last week were selecting a corpus, building a corpus, and some comment about transcription and annotation. I've tagged those here just to let you know I haven't forgotten about them. I've included them here in this session. So we won't be skipping over them. We will be going through them because it is really, really important. I suppose one of the things, if you remember from last week, we talked about what we're doing in this 4 hours as being a drop in the ocean. So when you're thinking about your research, you may look at different research methods, you may look at different approaches to research. It may not be the approach that you end up carrying out in your study, but what's really important is that you know about another way of doing something, and to keep the number of perspectives that you have open and available and multiple. And that's what's really, really important. And I would suggest that if this is something last week and this week is something that you are interested in knowing more about, I've signposted plenty of references. Please do search further. And if you want to, please contact me. I'm happy to give advice on that. But we are doing things now that are very much a drop in the ocean, but the ocean is made up of many drops. So we do need to keep going. So this session is very much more hands-on. It's very much more practical about conducting searches, reading results of searches, and interpreting results. And I appreciate that here, sharing our time and space today, some people may already know quite a lot about corpus-based methods. Some may not know quite so much. And what I want to do is to take us through slowly some of the basic skills that we can use with any corpus, with any online corpus database, if it's possible, and so that we can be very firm in our foundational skills around that. Very often, from personal experience, people get very worried about conducting searches. There's so much information, and the very common complaint, if you like, about corpus-based studies is that there's too much data, there's too much data. There are a number of ways that we can help ourselves to not be overwhelmed. One of those is being able to have a very definite research question, have a very definite reason for searching. And so we're going to start off that way today. So I'm going to give you a reason to search, and you can practice then developing your own research questions, and then applying hopefully some of the foundational skills that we go through today to some of the the matters and research questions that are central to your work and what it is that you want to do. Okay. So let's go. But wait. Okay, yes, you know I'm always going to say you need a reason, okay? And this is some of the problems that myself and my colleagues who work in corpus linguistics, corpus-based approaches to research, very often students and teachers and teacher educators get very excited about a corpus and then get very, very disappointed. It's boring, the search is too difficult, there's far too much data, I don't know what any of it means. And in order to stop feeling that way, you need a reason to search a corpus. Now, thinking about, we covered this last week about why we would use corpus-based approaches. On the one hand, we use them to be process automatically large amounts of data. We want to avoid unreliability of intuitions. So it's empirical. It gives us an evidence-based, and that is primarily why one would use a corpus, to give you evidence of something, okay? And what is that evidence of something? It's evidence of naturally occurring language in use, okay? So those are your fundamental reasons for examining a corpus. What we need to bear in mind is that they are very much focused on specific linguistic features. So you cannot, I'll give you an example, I've come across this a few times. Many people look at corpus and say, oh, I'll look at a corpus of newspapers and it'll show me how one particular group in society is discriminated against. Okay, now that is possible, but what you need to do is to construct your research question around that. And what you need to do is to link what your big major drive, your argument is, with specific linguistic features. Okay, and that's what a corpus is made up of language in use, and that's what you search in a corpus. You search how language is used, when it's used, who uses it, what words go with other words. So it is a specific linguistic search that you're doing. Okay. Another example I want to just share with you, corpora are unable to give information about whether something is possible or not. Sometimes there's the phrase of, I looked for this in a corpus and it's not there. That means people don't use it. Does it? Well, one of the important things that I hope we get from today is be careful. A corpus is a data set. It is only made up of the texts that are put in it. If you only put texts in a corpus that are made from a certain group of people in a certain context, you will get lots of examples of particular people using language in a particular context. It doesn't mean that other things are not possible. It only shows, a corpus will only show you what has been put in, okay? And that's, thinking about what we all do in terms of research and thinking about other research methods. That's really important. That's our core notion of sampling from any perspective or from any research method. So we need to remember that. A corpus is not some infinite oracle that will give you answers to everything. It will only give you answers based on the data that is in it. Okay. One of the other things to remember is a corpus will not give you why. Okay. We mentioned this last week. It won't give you why. So if you're expecting to go to a search corpus, search in that corpus for a particular word or a particular phrase, and you want to know, it will give me all of the examples and it will give me the reasons why it's used. It won't. Okay, it will give you sometimes very, very useful information about how often something is used, who uses it, what the word occurs with, what patterns of language there are across many millions of examples, but it won't tell you why. And that's part of our job as human beings, to be able to interpret what it is, or to be able to come up with a convincing interpretation of what the data shows us. So just bear that in mind. So just to go back, let's go. But remember, we need a reason. And I just want to give you I'm going to, if you like, I'll hold your hand through some examples here of doing some searches. So work that I'm involved in, I've been involved in academic discourse, examining academic discourse for a number of years now. And some of these, I come across some of these expressions, some of these perceptions, and sometimes they are directions even from teachers. So, and that interests me because I think this is what people think, this is what people believe, and this is what they understand to be true. But what does empirical evidence, what does evidence of language use in contexts tell us about how people actually use language? So I'm sure you, like I, have heard this a lot. So 2 examples here. There isn't that much difference between spoken lectures and written English, is there? So an academic lecture is very similar, we hear, or it's very much like written English. Is it? Is it really? Okay. What would we do? Is it the same? Is a spoken lecture the same as written English? And then the second one that we're going to have a look at is academic language is always formal, isn't it? So certainly with some colleagues that I work with, it's, oh, you know, your language has to be formal to be academic. I wonder what is meant by that. So if we take our first example, so this idea that spoken lectures and written English are very similar. So if you have a look here, this is an academic lecture. Theory of relativity and quantum theory, you can tell it's not mine, were both developed in the last 100 years. They've revolutionized the way we look at reality. To a large extent, they have made possible some of the modern inventions. So it's a fairly, you know, science lecture. Okay, and that's what lectures look like, isn't it? Or is it? Okay, so what we might want to do is to have a look at a corpus of academic spoken English. Okay, to see, well, we have our experiences of being in a lecture, and our experiences of being in a lecture are sometimes different from how it is we want to look at them with some distance, being able to analyze them. And so we can look in a corpus of spoken academic English. And I want to hopefully show you this, and I hope I can swap screens now. So please bear with me, people. Sorry. There. Okay. Sorry, 1 second. Let's try this again. Sorry. Can you see this okay? You can, great. I'm seeing some nods along the bottom of my screen, so I'll take that. Okay, so this is the Michigan corpus of academic spoken English, okay? And if we go to the homepage, so my case is the Michigan corpus of academic spoken English, okay? It's based at the University of Michigan. It has been collected over a number of years. Some things I want to point out here because I'm going to come back to them. Okay, it's really important when you look at a corpus for the first time, or even if you're coming back to one, have a look at when the page was last updated. I know this sounds very odd, but I'm going to come back to that later on. Okay, have a look before you even search. Have a look at when was the page last updated. That can give you a good insight into how live and how well up to date and how free of, if you like, errors and difficulties that a corpus can be. If it hasn't been looked at if it hasn't been updated for the last 10 years, you might want to think about some of the reliability. You might want to think about about access, the reliability of access, and about the information that's there. Okay, so What this is, it was a searchable part of collection of transcripts of academic speech events, okay, recorded at the University of Michigan. Remember what I said before, a corpus only contains what has been put in it, okay? So when we search this, what will we be searching? We will be searching lectures, seminars, tutorials from an American university, at Michigan University of Michigan. That's what we will be searching, okay? So we always, please always remember, the corpus only has what's put in it, okay? It doesn't give you definitive answers about all lectures look like this and all seminars look like this. Be careful and always remind yourselves what's in it, where does it come from? So what we see here, there are 152 transcripts, okay, with over 1 million words. Okay? Now that is quite, 100. Think about 152 transcripts. When we talk about 152 transcripts, that very often moves over onto 152 separate speech events. So it could be 152 lectures, it could be 152 seminars. In the actual fact, it's made up of a number of different types of speech events, okay? And again, that's really, really, really important to bear in mind. I'm going to just click with the browse, and if you want to do this in real time with me, that's absolutely brilliant. I should have done that first. What can I do this? Can I copy that into the chat? Might be asking too much of myself here, but okay. So in the chat is the link to the mic case. So if you want to do this at the same time that I'm doing it, please feel free. Okay. So what you see in this corpus, in this next page, in the browse page, you can see all of the different types of speech events. Okay. So you can see of the 152 transcripts are here. What are they? Okay, and you can see here, scrolling through, there's a variety of different types of speech events. Okay, so sometimes I think this is a very useful one. Dissertation defense, for anybody who's preparing for a viva, and sometimes those are very secret spaces, secret kinds of events. If you want to go and have a look and see what one, at least conducted in the University of Michigan, looks like, go and have a look and read through it and see if you can get any help or assistance. But what you see here are the different types of speech event types that take place in a university context. Instantly, that should signal to us that the notion that university speech events are made up of lectures and seminars is actually very much underestimated. Okay, we have a working idea that work at universities, lectures and seminars and tutorials, and that's kind of it. But actually, it's made up of quite a number of different types of speech events. We've got here labs, we've got large lectures versus small lectures. We've got meetings, we've got office hours. Okay, so you can think about how if you are planning to build a corpus, one of the really important things is to consider what speech events do you want represented in your corpus. Okay. Last week, I talked about using corpus-based approaches to text analysis. This is where, in some instances, I didn't have to do this bit because I wasn't making a big corpus. I wasn't making comparisons. What I was doing was using corpus tools to aid my text analysis. But in the other example that I showed you from last week, where I had created 2 different corpora, so a corpus of university talk, and then another corpus of English language classrooms. So I had to go through this kind of principle building, so the kinds of speech events that we want to be represented in our corpus. You can see here again, academic division. So, your different universities will, categorize off their disciplines in different ways. Arts, humanities versus social sciences or physical sciences, academic disciplines. Also, here you've got participant level. So there is information within the transcripts and coded for the software to be able to read about who said what. Okay. And again, remember, when we're looking at a corpus, what is put into the corpus is the only thing that you can search. But remember, it was produced by a human being at some point for some reason. So we might be very interested in which particular group of people produced what in the corpus. And we can do that here. You can see here. So there's junior undergraduates, faculty, staff, senior, and then visitors. Interestingly, also for this corpus, and it's something that doesn't appear in all corpora, and I'll come back to that point in a minute about the variety of corpora that there are. Here, this corpus has also been tagged. The transcripts have been tagged for whether or not they are highly interactive or whether or not they are mostly monologic. Okay. Now that is a decision made by the corpus builder. You can tell it's a corpus of spoken English. Okay, so that's what the designers, that's what the researchers are primarily interested in. And therefore, when one thinks about spoken English, the notion of interactivity is really, really, really crucial to any investigation of speech. And very often we have these, if you like, intuitions or notions that a lecture is something that's very monologic and a seminar is something that's very interactive. And so interactive can be about the number of people in the event, but more often than not, it's about how many different turns there are in one speech event. So you could have a lecture, but actually the lecture is made up of 20 people. And within that lecture, every person participates and they talk. Okay. And so that signals it's the interactivity as marked by the turns, the different speakers that are there who are producing and contributing to the text that's produced. Okay. So just to show you some of those. You also, have also, when we look here at speaker attributes, okay? So again, we've got our academic role and position. Here it was coded for native speaker status and also for first language of the speakers that were produced, the text that are included here. Okay. So I just want to, and if you want to go to the chat, click onto that link to the Michigan corpus and have that open. And if you want to sort of have a try at it whilst I go through, please do so. Just going to try to go back to my other PowerPoint, so please bear with me a second. I always think there should be music playing at this point where there is a... Okay. Can you see my screen again? My PowerPoint screen? Perfect. Okay. Thank you for nodding. I can see. Thank you very much. Most appreciated. Okay. So one of the other things when we are using a corpus is something that some person or people have put a lot of effort into constructing and to making available. So as with any other academic resource or with any other source that we use, it is best practice to cite that source accurately. Okay. I know sometimes we see in different publications, you've got my case or corpus of contemporary American English, but it's very useful. At some point on the website that you access, you will be given the reference by which the authors would prefer you to use for signaling the corpus. So it's not just about a link to the website, it is about the actual reference as well. And so this is the reference for that corpus from Rita Simpson and colleagues who produced that. Okay, so when we search a corpus, so we did all this, and we look at what an academic lecture looks like, we thought it might look like that, the theory of relativity and quantum theory, but actually it looks more like that. Okay. the theory of relativity and quantum theory together were developed in the last 100 years. Okay, I'm sounding like a very boring person now, but my point here is it doesn't look like this. Okay, it looks different. Now, it sounds different. What's the difference and why? Does anybody want to unmute and to come on and say what's the difference and why?
Halo, good afternoon. Para peserta, silahkan kalau ada yang mau berkomentar. Halo, Dr. Aisling.
Hello, hello.
I'm Aisha. Okay, this is a kind of lecture, right? The transcript of lecture. Oke,
Yes.
para peserta, di sini contoh dari transkripsi sebuah percakapan di perkuliahan. Silakan ada yang ingin memberikan komentar. Seems to me that the lecturer keep on saying to some extent that's the style of the lecture, right? And we can make a kind of research about the style of a lecturer when giving a lecture or explaining something, kind of discourse analysis, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you're straight away pointing out to these features. So the there's and then there's and there's and
it's typical me actually. I do sometimes do like that.
And the point is, every speaker does, regardless of whether it's first, second, third, fourth, whatever, and in whatever language. There will always be in online, I'm doing it now, I can't stop, in online communication. By online communication, I mean spontaneous, as it's happening, moment by moment interaction or language use. We are doing brilliant things as human beings. We are using language. We are trying to communicate our thoughts and our ideas with and to and for another person. So the activity of speech cannot be underestimated, the amount of cognitive effort that we put into that. Now, when you couple that with something that's the difference between a spontaneous conversation that I would have with my children or my mother, or it's a relaxed conversation and I talk about familiar things and words that come easy. When we think about an academic context, we're dealing with words very often that have more conceptual meanings. They often have many more syllables than we might have in our conversation. So therefore, we are brilliant as human beings, our abilities to speak. But remember what I think we mentioned last week, classroom contexts, and particularly academic contexts, are the places where conversation and books meet. And therefore that puts an incredible amount of cognitive load on a human being as they're trying to produce speech. Okay, it's not always about the individual sort of idiolect of an individual, and that is something that you raised is really interesting. We all know we've got the lecturer that we all kind of have had at some point, where you just notice the little things that are particular to them. I remember, and just to give you an example, I remember a student of mine said, "Can I do a discourse analysis of your classroom?" And I said, yes, do that, that's good. And then they produced, they're like, "Oh, do you know what you do, Aisling? You waste words." "Oh, do I? Right, how?" And they said, "No, you do this thing where you, after somebody gives us, if you ask somebody for an answer and they've given their elaborated response, and you've asked them and you're coming to the end, you do yeah. And you do it 3 times. Yeah. Aisling, you only need to do yeah. Right, okay. So there is that part of the idiolect of an individual speaker. But what we do know is that certainly things like uhs and ums and pauses, so that's what highlighted here with the dot, 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 that pauses are incredibly important because they have a really good function for us as human beings as we're trying to produce speech. They give us a little bit of time. They help us to plan. And what we see when we look at large numbers of examples through a corpus is that this is something that's typical. Okay? It's not just one speaker. This happens a lot. Interestingly, work done by Henry Herbert Clark looked at the differences in English related to the function of and the function of
Yes.
So what are we doing here? But actually, even with and we signal they have different functions, or that's what whenever Clark looked at it,
there have meaning.
Absolutely different meanings. Absolutely. So is like I'm thinking about it and I'm going to
something.
Yeah, absolutely. It's signaling I'm going to. I want to continue speaking, but I'm not quite sure yet.
Yeah.
Whereas the is a bit more. I'm not sure if I'm going to speak or not.
Yeah.
All right. And so everything that kind of comes out of our mouths is really important. I suppose the part of the bigger point here is that we sometimes think of these things as mistakes. We sometimes think of them as errors, and actually they're actually not. They're things used by a lot of people in these contexts, and they have a really clear function. And so that's we can look at that. Now, what's interesting, what we have just done together, and thank you very much, City, for having that conversation with me, for having that discussion, is that we have looked at data and we have begun to talk about what is the difference and why might that happen. And that's what we have to do with the results of any corpus search. We look at differences, we look at similarities, we look at patterns. Then we talk about them and we think about reasons for why. And what we then do, because we're all researchers, we then connect it to the previous knowledge that we have. We connect it, so City mentioned then about connecting it to discourse analysis. And I mentioned then about a paper which had conducted a study of uhs and ums. That's what we do as researchers, and we can't forget that that's what we do as researchers. When you're using a corpus, you're looking at data. It will give you connections in the data and it will give you results. It is always up to us as human beings to look at the patterns, pull out what patterns there might be, and then be able to connect them with previous knowledge and previous research. Okay. All right, thank you. So we've got one more example, and this was, I suppose, on the one hand, this was very much about interaction in spoken academic contexts. Another example that I want to show here, and it might be perhaps more of interest to some of you who are less focused on linguistic work and more focused perhaps on issues related to social sciences, might be around looking at particular groups, might be things like you want to look at language and age or language and gender or other things that you're interested in. So looking at academic language is always formal, isn't it? Okay, so that's what we're starting with. We're challenging this idea, is academic language always formal? I'm very interested, a colleague of mine, Dr. Brona Murphy in the University of Edinburgh, conducted a corpus study, and she was particularly interested in sociolinguistics. And she was most particularly interested in age and gender in female talk. Okay. And so, and I put her reference here, and it's, I recommend it because it's a really good read, and it goes through how Dr. Murphy used corpus linguistics to be able to explore sociolinguistic questions, but also to produce evidence which speaks to larger discourses and larger ideas in research in the social sciences in general. So it was looking at age and gender. And so that made me think, right, academic language is always formal, isn't it? So that made me think, is there something about academic language formal? So how do we codify formal? How do we decide if something is formal or not formal? Remember what I said before, that using corpus, it will involve a search term. So it's very bottom up. It is around using linguistic items to search. So we can think of, right, well, what is formal language in academic contexts? So I thought, oh, well, there's lots and lots and lots. And if you think about it, I just wanted to show you another thing here. You know, people produce academic word lists, okay? And it's not just word lists. This is taken from Simpson, Black, and Ellis in 2010. These are like formulaic sequences of word lists, okay? So we know a lot about what is academic language. And I thought to myself, well, what isn't? What would I think would be the last thing I would be expecting to find in academic discourse? I don't know if any of you would like to say anything. What might be the last thing you might expect to find?
Silakan kepada audiens, kepada para peserta, ada yang mau berkomentar? Can you repeat the question, Dr. Ageng?
Sure. So this idea is that academic language is always formal. And so we can think of lots of formal versions of formal language. But I wondered, what's the most informal piece of language that you could think of that you might not expect in an academic context?
Okay. Menurut Anda, apa bahasa informal yang ada di konteks di yang sering Anda temui di lingkungan? Ada yang bisa memberikan komentar? Silahkan di unmute. Informal language sometimes sometimes when I do the lecture in the classroom, not all the time I do the formal language. Sometimes I try to mingle with my students to use millennial language, like what do you call it, slang language in the classroom, but still polite. For example, they sometimes connect two words into one word. For example, on the way, and they say OTW. OTW is the English from on the way.
Yes.
Kind of thing.
Absolutely, you're absolutely spot on there. You know, absolutely spot on. You want to connect with people, and you know that's what you're saying. You want to connect with people. I want people to connect with the information and the knowledge, and I want them to connect with me. And that's exactly, you mentioned the word slang there, and that's exactly what I was thinking of when I thought of what's the opposite of academic language is slang. And so slang sometimes can fall into the category of what we might call taboo language. And so taboo language refers to words that are perceived as bad. They're sometimes incredibly rude, incredibly derogatory. They can sometimes, when children say them, their parents are in a panic. It's those kinds of words. But also part of that is slang, where slang is associated with only a very particular group of people. It might be, you mentioned millennials, I think, and so straight away, it's the language of young people, if you like.
Young people,
And that's, as we know, that's exactly where the most innovation in language occurs. Innovation in language occurs in young people. And unfortunately, I think very often it's perceived as something that's bad, when actually that is exactly where our language changes. Our language changes with young people. But yes, so that's exactly what I thought when I thought, right, well, if I go to the opposite thing I think of as academic language. And so I did. And you can do that too if you want to go ahead and to search. So what I did was I went again to a corpus of spoken academic English, and I searched for one taboo word. Okay, so I just did a one individual word search. I did choose a taboo word. Okay, so I wanted to choose one that I thought definitely wouldn't occur. So one that's perceived as a bad word. It is in the dictionary, but it's perceived. I won't present it here just in case you might be mildly offended. But just to show you how that works. What happened was I put in a bad word, so a word that is taboo, a word that is perceived to be not used by speakers in an academic context, and it's not polite. So that's something, City, you mentioned. Use slang, but polite.
Polite, yes.
Yeah, you know, because there's still, you want to connect, but you don't want to be perceived as being impolite and to break the frame of an academic environment. But actually, one of the words that I chose here would break that frame. It would break the frame of politeness. And I thought, right, when I search this corpus, I'm going to get 0. It's going to come up as 0, okay? In fact, what I found was this. Oh. When I searched for my so-called bad word, my taboo word, it existed, okay? It existed in the corpus, which meant that people do use it. And I thought, okay, people use it. Where do they use it? How often do they use it? Is it only one type of person who uses it? And so when we go to my case, we can see from the search and we go to the statistics, the transcript statistics. And what it will give you, so this one word that I searched for, it appeared in a astronomy discussion section. It appeared in a biology of birds field lab. It appeared in a linguistics independent study advising. So in all of these different types of speech events, this, if you like, this taboo word appeared. Okay. Here we have, if you look at this column, this link, you'll see this hyperlink, and you might want to do it as I'm speaking, please do. This, if when you press that link, it takes you to the full transcript of the recording. So you can see exactly from the beginning of the speech event to the end of the speech event, you can see where this particular word occurred. What we've got here are the matches, and that shows you how many times that one word appeared, or the search item, sorry, it's the search item, appeared in this particular speech event. So you can see that this one taboo word appeared once in a discussion section in astronomy class. We see here that in a freshman orientation tour, it occurred 7 times. Okay, so we might think something is going on here, right? The most frequent place that this occurs is a freshman orientation tour. Now, you may well be more familiar with a US academic context than I, but a freshman orientation tour. So it's the new students, new students coming to be part of the university context, and they presumably they go on their tour of campus. So we might expect, excuse me one second. Excuse me. So we might expect, as City was saying, about a bit of camaraderie, a bit of solidarity, a bit of trying to speak each other's language. It might be associated with young people, it might not. But what we can see here, that this is the most in terms of number of matches, it's 7, right? Importantly, I mentioned this last week, what we need to do is we can't compare the freshman orientation tour with the astronomy discussion section. We can't do that on bare frequencies alone. We can't do that on raw frequencies. We must look at, if you like, a frequency per 1,000 words or per 10,000 words, because that gives us a much better way of being able to compare when things are not the same. So the astronomy discussion is 5,800 words. This freshman tour is 14,000 words. Okay, so it might be that 7 matches here, it's no more or less frequent than it would be here. And what we need to do is to have a normalized frequency. Okay, and that's what we're looking at here. This frequency per 10,000 words is what we call a normalized frequency. So it allows us to compare like with like. Okay, and from that, okay, which speech event is actually the place where the taboo word occurs most frequently. or most often. You see here, it's the biopsychology lab, all right, with a greater frequency than any of the others. That's where this occurs. Okay, so in the lab. So it's not the freshman orientation tour when everyone is trying to, presumably, try to make friends. It's not. It's actually a biopsychology lab. Okay, so this again, it knocks our intuitions of where City said, we want to use slang, but we want to keep it polite. Well, actually, I searched for an impolite word and I found it. And I didn't just find it in one place by one, if you like, naughty or bad speaker. That wasn't the case. It's across a number of speech events. It's also across a number of disciplines. So it's not as if, one discipline has a particular preference for taboo words than others. So this is when we look at a corpus, these are the kind of results we look at, and we need to work out, well, what do they actually mean? Okay. Oops. So we can see here with my case, it will split it down to academic division for us. And here it also gives us the total number of tokens by gender. Okay, so this was constructed at a time where probably the options were male, female. There probably wasn't an option in the form to click some, other options that are more contemporary available, like non-binary or whatever. But what you see here, what does this tell you in relation to taboo words in academic context? What does this tell you?
Male produce more taboo words.
Well, of one particular word, you're right, Udi, absolutely.
Yeah,
Dr.
male.
Male. Male. Like we're talking about, remember where this is based. This is in an American university, so we always remember back to where our data comes from. Certainly, Udi, it does, Dr. Udi, it does. What it also shows us is that females use it too.
Oh, okay. Right.
And, when we looking at sociolinguistics, or we look at some of myths around language, there may be the assumption or the intuition that only males use taboo language, when actually this would show us otherwise. It is not only one particular gender. The other, and what does this tell us? So this is by academic role. So undergraduate, other graduate, and faculty.
Ashley.
Yes.
Yeah, Ashley. I'm interested in research on taboo words. I believe that some students here who are joining probably starting getting interested in understanding better the use of taboo words in school students or university students. But there is always an urgency for every of us to show the pedagogical implication. So if any students, for example, would like to do this kind of study, and then we will ask, for example, them to provide pedagogical implication. So what kind of pedagogical implications that we can share through this kind of studies?
Yeah, I think probably one of the research in corpus linguistics in general has always made recommendations for pedagogy. But I think I conducted a piece of research recently that showed that so when I did a systematic review of studies in which were corpus-based studies, 2/3 of those studies, they said, my research has pedagogical implications, but they never give any outcome or evaluation of what those when you implement those pedagogical implications, what are the outcomes of those pedagogical implications? And I think that is a significant issue for those of us working on the one hand in corpus-based research, but also in relation to pedagogy and how we can make better connections between the two. Now, that is a significant finding, even whenever one can read through the research and see very clear pedagogical implications. What ends up being in the research article is well, teachers should know more about this.
Mm-hmm.
I think, yes, we all know that everybody should know more about everything, but where is the study that takes the implications and implements it into the program? So only about a third of the studies that I looked at actually did that. And so it is possibility to do that, to take that straight from having a look at this. Now, what do we do with this? Taboo language is an interesting one to kind of look at. I mean, I think any strong pedagogical application of a study of taboo words is to be able to show how they aren't, it's about dispelling myths. So the notion is that people use bad words because their vocabulary is limited, or people use bad words because they are associated with particular in-groups or out-groups, and I think particularly around undergraduate linguistics students or undergraduate education students, I think the role there is to be able to challenge assumptions, challenge stereotypes is really where a lot of we can use evidence from a corpus to be able to challenge stereotypes and to challenge, if you like, some of our hard-held beliefs that don't bear out to be true. And I think around taboo language, I think that's certainly where the pedagogical implications are around raising awareness. I also think it's a good idea. Some of the beauty of applications for corpora is that it allows a little bit of distance between teachers and students. So sometimes teachers might be unhappy with using taboo language, or they might be unhappy. But if there's a bit of distance to say, actually, this word, we're just looking at this word, seeing how it's used, we can see how other people, when you use this word, here's the perception. So there's lots of work that could be done around, you're choosing to use this word, what are the effects of using that word? So I think it allows a bit of distance and evidence for that. I'm not plugging or anything, and I have no affiliation, but there's a very recent new journal called Applied Corpus Studies. It's by Elsevier, and I think that I was really delighted, and it's Paul Thompson and Eric Frignell are the editors. And I was delighted to see that new journal because it's very much around, we've had arguably 60 years of corpus research. Now, let's have a look at some of the evaluations of being able to implement the findings of that. And don't get me wrong, there are plenty of studies which go from the analysis of language, they go from creating a corpus, analysing language use, analysing functions and frequencies, producing teaching material, and then evaluating teaching material. And there's a really good paper, and I'll include it in the list of references for this, a really good paper by, I can't remember that, but it was a very good paper conducted from the US, which did exactly that. And what it looked at was the corpus was medical encounters. So it was about nurses interacting with patients. So constructed a corpus of nurse-patient interaction, conducted an analysis looking at what's frequent, what's less frequent, what are the patterns, and then from that used the findings of that corpus study to construct teaching materials that were based on what actually happens in interactions, and I'll come to that in a second. And then what the researcher did was to develop a teaching program and then to evaluate that, to say, right, well, what was the impact of using this material versus maybe using more traditional material? And so that is certainly is possible. But I think that's something to really think about, and plenty of opportunities for research publications for those who do want to pursue a more applied investigation and implementation. Sorry, Udi, I don't know if that answered your question or if
it does answer my question, because
Okay,
when we speak about like corpus studies, I think one of the hardest part is to tell the readers about the pedagogical implications. Like when we are speaking about these taboo words, I think like students who are interested in understanding taboo words, in analyzing taboo words in corpus, but like what to tell when they are like, you know, pushed through, right? The pedagogical implication, because within our structure of a thesis, for example, there is like one section that really encourage students to write the pedagogical implications. So I think it's always a good idea like to show that corpus study would always bring with it a kind of pedagogical implications, including things like corpus studies on these taboo words.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Can we relate it to character education in Indonesian curriculum? The pedagogical implication that the result of corpus of taboo,
Right.
and we can relate it to the character education
Right.
in the national curriculum of in Indonesia.
Right.
Probably we can connect it the result of the research. The result of this taboo research will give some corpus data to the ministry in building the teaching material, as Ling told us that the end of the what is it creating corpus, analyzing, producing, and then creating teaching materials based on the corpus
studies
data in Taboo.
Yeah.
And it's really important. And just to add that last bit, it's always really important, I think, for research articles, is that there's an evaluation of the use of that material. You know, that's always really crucial, because that's what we find was missing. So looking at research over the last 20 years, they, you know, the far fewer articles actually had that final component, which very often many publishers or many ministries want. They want to see, right, well, you've used this, you've done this, but did it work? Was it effective? Did it do what it was supposed to do? And so being able to build that final bit of evaluation, and it doesn't have to be, you know, evaluation can take many forms, as we know, and it can be about, well, what were participants' perspectives of using that material? So when teachers use that material, did they feel the class went better or worse? Did they feel more confident? You know, as well as the kind of evaluations that we know about, which are large questionnaires, we tick, 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 tick all the way through. And we can think about asking, you know, pupils, what did you actually learn from that? You know, what would you, what do you know now that you didn't before? But I do think that having some evidence collected from evaluations is actually key to that. And it's key, we need to see that. We need, because there takes an awful lot of investment for corpus-based approaches. Right. And by that, I mean time. I mean, there is a material input, but actually it takes a long time. This is human time that we're talking about to collect this, to analyze it. So we've got to weigh up, is having access to this amount of data, is it actually going to be really useful for us, or is it only mildly useful for us, or is it not useful at all? Now, I think it's not useful at all, but we need to be able to, I suppose, think about the work that we do and to think about the consequences and the impact of that. But certainly, I would encourage everyone that if you are going to do that, that you build in, even if you're starting with a corpus study, that you build in an evaluation of some sort, whether it's, and the evaluation, even on a corpus study, I often think, and I wish now I had done it online, to then look and say, right, well, one evaluation would be how many people have used it since, what have they used it for? Now, a lot of you will get a lot of online corpora who do that and say, if you can use this corpus for free, but if you are going to use it, please let know what you're using it for, so they can build up a picture of how many people have used it and what they used it for. And I think that's really good. It builds into a narrative around the kind of impact that a corpus can have. But I think if you were to build a corpus, that might be something you would want to think about. I think that's a lesson that I've learned, is to think about how you would evaluate the time that you put into it, and, you know, ask ourselves hard questions. Was it worth it? Was that time well spent? What was the result? Now, there are always good answers, obviously, but we need to, I suppose, collect evidence for it too. One of the other things I just wanted to show you, and I know we're kind of, there's never enough time, but one of the things I wanted you to go and to have a try, and to give you sort of 5 minutes to try. I just want to show you something else. Lexical bundles. So lexical bundles are words that co-occur so frequently that they're kind of stuck together. Okay. They are stuck together in ways that make them almost impossible to cut when we look at their frequency. Okay, so this is about frequency. It's not about meaning, it's about the frequency of co-occurrence, right? And so Doug Biber and Susan Conrad and Bibiana Cortez conducted a very, very significant study looking at, in 2004, looking at lexical bundles across academic contexts. Okay, and just to give you an example of what they mean, these are the kinds of lexical bundles, phrases that we're talking about. If you look at, I mean, you know, on the other hand, oh, I don't know, in terms of, and what do you mean? So those are the things that we're talking about here. And I'm sure if we have, I don't know if we have this recorded or not, but if you went back through my language, you'll see quite a lot of those probably, except on the other hand. I never use on the other hand, and that's something I want you to look at in a minute or two. Okay, so what did they do? Well, they had access to a huge corpus of academic discourse, and it wasn't just spoken, it was written as well. So they collected academic prose, they collected textbooks, examples from classroom teaching, and they also, separate to that, they also collected examples of conversation. Okay, so conversation in a non-academic context as well. And what they find when they began to examine these lexical bundles, these phrases that stick together, was that these phrases that stick together most frequently, look at the amount here in relation to classroom teaching. Okay, so these lexical bundles occur a lot in classroom teaching. It's not just the amount of them, it's the type of them. Okay, so looking again, where it said we need to look at both frequency, but we as human beings need to interpret. So when the researchers looked at these lexical bundles, they looked at the functions that they have. What was this phrase doing in the discourse? What was it doing for the person who was using it? What was it doing for the listener? Okay. And that's kind of pretty fundamental to our notion of text and discourse in a corpus. These are all examples of people doing stuff with words, okay? And we can't forget that. That's you know, when people use taboo words, they do it for a reason. As Sydney said, you know, I wanted to use slang, what is it, you know, connect with them. I wanted to build a relationship with them. People use words to do stuff. It's not by accident that we do this, right? So when you look at classroom teaching, Biber and colleagues looked at the functions, different functions of classroom bundles, and talked about them as referential, so referring to something. Discourse organizers, now let's kind of organizing the discourse, and then also stance. So stance is about presenting your position. So I think that, it seems that, things like that. And what they find, you can see this really clearly here. And I think this is really interesting for us to look at in terms of function. So this is where you looked at the corpus, you extracted the frequencies, you looked at the function of what those items actually do, and then you, if you like, apply another quantitative analysis to them because you compare the frequencies. And here you can see stance bundles. So these stance bundles, which show a person's position on something. So their epistemic position, I know, I don't know, or their attitudinal position, I believe, I don't believe, that sort of thing. you can see here where they're most frequent is in conversation and in classroom teaching. In conversation, why would that be? Why would we want to show stance in conversation? Anybody?
Silakan, ada yang ingin merespon?
So stance is about I think, I know, I believe, or she thinks, or he thinks, or they think, or so stance and sorry. So what we do and think about, why do we have conversations with people? Why are conversations with colleagues so important? Why are conversations with our families so important?
To build relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. That is fundamental. It's about relationship building and relationship maintaining. Maintaining relationships and building relationships. And it's exactly as you said before, City, about your taboo words. Okay. And you can see, actually, in classroom teaching, it occurs slightly more frequently. So what City described is exactly what we do in classrooms. We try to build relationships with our students. In textbooks, why does it not matter? Why do relationships not matter in textbooks?
Only one way.
Well, for a start, the person who is doing the producing isn't there. It's hard to have a relationship with someone who's not there. And that's the difference with writing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Writing,
two ways, but only one way textbook.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, I mean, that's interesting, and I'm sure Dr. Eddy, you will, I'm sure, talk to us at some point about actually you can have writing that's quite dialogic, that attempts to engage with readers. But in terms of whether or not they do, that's not done by using lexical bundles in this instance. Much more referential bundles here as well. Also, sorry, one more thing as well. We've got these discourse organizers. So this is about organizing the discourse, so telling people what's coming next, or signaling. And clearly you can see in classrooms. Why is this the case? There's a lot of organization that has to happen in a teacher's classroom. It has to be, okay, everybody, now we're going to do this. I want you to look at the board. I keep doing this, it's like the thing behind me, but that's classroom. It's about managing and trying to get people to do things, and being able to respond to classroom context. So that's what we're looking at in relation to lexical bundles. Now, here I've given you some examples here that I want you to go and test out, okay, and see if any of these exist in my case corpus. Okay, I've just put 3 in here. If you want to focus on one, that's okay. What I would like you to do is go to the search. All right, so I'll try and do this. You should have the link from before. On the screen, hopefully it should be there. So can you see that? Okay, am I back onto my case?
Yeah, it's clear.
So if you go over to search and you put in here, you can see what I've searched recently in here. And if you search one of the suggestions that I've made here, okay. I'll just go with, I'll go with that one first. This is just an example, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if you've heard that phrase before, blah, blah, blah. And actually a very, very frequent phrase. I'm interested at the minute in all, okay. You can select by age if you so wish, if that's something that you have a reason to do. Now remember our B is always, let's go. What's the reason for it? So please remember, whatever it is. Now it could be that your reason is, I'm just playing and I just want to check things out. That's a really good reason. Your reason doesn't have to be a very serious reason. If you want to get used to a corpus, the best thing to do is to play, So, but have a reason, you can, but think when you're thinking, maybe I am interested in 17 to 20, interested in young people, or maybe I'm interested in only those who have Cantonese as a first language, or you can think about, and then you can think about your reasons of why you might be making those kinds of decisions. But for now, I'll just go with all. Oops, sorry. All. Will I get any? Will there be any blah blah blah? What do you think? Yes, no. I should have had a poll, shouldn't I? But yes, no. Okay. I submit the search.
Oh,
yes, exactly, Andy. Yeah.
Wow.
All right.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah. So it certainly exists. All right. Now, this is what we talked about this last week. This is a concordance. Okay. So it gives you all of the examples in the 152 transcripts. Okay. Remember when we looked, I'm just going to go, remember when we went to our home and there are 152 transcripts. Okay. So always bear that in mind of what it is that you're looking for here. I'll just go back here, blah, 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 all. Oops. Sorry. Some research. Okay. All of them. Now, when you click here, this is what I showed you before. This is where it could take you straight to your transcript. All right. And this is the transcript. This is where the blah, blah, blah came. Now, really, so we mentioned last week, I think, about metadata. And so metadata is about the data about the data, right? So it's I don't like saying the additional because it is so core to what is important. So this is the biology study group. Very often when you're constructing a corpus, you want to give a transcript a code or a name. Academic division, it was interactive rating was high. It's got 5 students and 5 speakers. Now, this is why you want to look at metadata and why it's important if you're thinking about designing a corpus to capture metadata. So this is from 2000. This is 20 years old. Okay, right. So when you think again about some of the questions you might be interested in, you might be interested in looking at change over time. You might be interested in saying 20 years ago students said this, but actually 20 years ago they say something different. Right? And so then you can go to sorry, just to be be clear here that the transcripts will be in turns. Okay, so this is the first turn of the speaker, then the next turn for the next speaker, and so on. What you get in brackets like these are what we might refer to as paralinguistic data. So it might be, and it tends to be, depending on the transcription convention, things like laughs might be included, things like coughs might be included. And if there's visual data, it might be nods. It might also be the kinds of noises that we make, which are very meaningful, like this. Now that's very meaningful, like, the kinds of things that
sighing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sighing.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Sighing. And it's, and sighs can mean different, much as our uhs and our ums can have different functions. Our sighs, one can be, and the other can be, it's kind of a loving sigh versus a very frustrated sigh. Mm-hmm. All right. So this is what the link back will give you. And you can download these transcripts. That's part of what the real beauty about corpus data and corpora that are available online. You have got access to this data. Now, my case is entirely free, and I'll talk a bit about that later on, about some things to be aware of. But given that most of us at the minute are kind of stuck in our houses or in our accommodation, and people aren't going out and having conversations, and people aren't, giving lectures in a face-to-face context, we have access to a large amount of data. So just because we have restricted movement and we have restricted access to speech events in contemporary real life, look to corpora as a really good source of data to try to find what it is that you want to investigate. So, it is possible, dare I say it, it is possible to conduct a thesis on a PhD thesis on spoken academic discourse without leaving your room. Nowadays it kind of is. Okay, so that's what the column here shows you. Okay, the search item. Sorry, the search item will always be presented in the middle. And why is that important? It's important because it gets you to focus, and it also gets us to move away from the notion that that spoken language is spatially organized. It's temporally organized. Okay, so we might, in grammar, we talk about left clefts and right clefts, right? That doesn't work for spoken language. You've got before and after, right? So anyway, we put this centrally. What you can do is you can organize, right? And I'll just show you this very briefly. So blah, blah, blah. You might be interested in what happens just before the person says blah, blah, blah. Or you might be interested in what happens just after the person says blah, blah, blah. And so that you can arrange this setup. So you can go search item, but I want them organized one alphabetically, one to the left. And so you can sort them. And so it puts them in alphabetic. So one to the left, so along here. So you can, it starts with A, works its way down to B, down, and so on and so forth. Okay. So that tells you what comes directly before. If you wanted to know what comes directly after blah, 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 it can give you blah, blah, blah. It seems to be from here, if we look at these results, what comes after blah, blah, blah is more blah, 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 right? So it looks as if blah, blah, blah happens 5 times more than 3 times. Also, remember last week when we looked at concordance lists, always, look a little bit wider, because you can see here what else happens. Okay, after someone says blah, 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 there's some laughter. Okay, so laughter appears not, that might be something that you want to, why do people say blah, blah, blah? Again, is it that they know that it's going to cause a laugh? Is it, why do we use laughter? Why do we do that? Okay, right. So what I would like you to do, take sort of the next 5 minutes. Right, I'm going to try and stop this and go back. Okay, can you see the screen again? Yep, okay. So if you want to go and just sort of take the next 5 minutes to play around, okay? Search for some of those bundles within that corpus and see what happens, see what you come up with. Okay, so I will kind of give you 5 minutes to do that. Okay, so.
Excuse me, Aisling, is the audience were asked to try the corpus?
Yes. Yes.
Oke, para partisipan silahkan untuk mencoba link berikut, lalu memasukkan ekspresi yang ada di sini. I'll tell you what, on the other hand, you know what I mean, or whatever. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
You could do whatever, yeah, you could do whatever actually. That's
Yes, okay, thank you.
So I'll just, while you're doing that, I'll just, for those of you maybe maybe if internet access is a bit difficult, I can just I can go through some of them here too, but I'll do it quietly so that you can have some. Okay, that was about 5 minutes, and I'm, you know, you can see how you can get very involved in 5 minutes. Does anyone want to share any observations or?
Silakan kepada para peserta yang ingin sharing dari hasil observasinya dengan menggunakan corpus link yang sudah diberikan oleh S-Link. Halo? Anybody want to share? Ada yang ingin menyampaikan hasil dari research-nya?
I think what's interesting, just to sort of prompt along, and just by contrast, you can see there is a clear, it's when you compare different types of lexical bundles, you can certainly see a difference in frequency. So this phrase, I'll tell you what, is very rarely used in comparison to something like on the other hand, or I'll tell you what, or know what I mean. One of the, when we look at, depending on what, again, what you're interested in, I know that we're doing this kind of just as practice for a corpus searches. You can hear when I search, you know what I mean, and I look to what comes next, you know what I mean. It happens 122 times in 41 transcripts. When we scroll down, you can see, you know what I mean, and then like appears quite closely thereafter. So you know what I mean, like, so we can see this may be, for example, when we look at some of those, is people trying to give an example or trying to think of an example, but that might not be what the phrase we would associate with that. We might often think, so for example, but you know what I mean, like, and then it moves on. So there are different ways that we can become more familiar with what happens and the functions of these phrases when they're used. Also, whenever we look at the statistic results for this, I think an interesting, you will always want to make more explorations once we start. So just this search, which we're doing really for practice, has highlighted something that we might want to look at further. So you can see here that much that we looked, so just again looking at gender as an example, but you might do it by age or interactivity. Interactivity, there are two things here when we look at these ratings. So the phrase, you know what I mean, occurs predominantly in the most interactive speech events. All right. So there is something very much about that phrase that is trying to connect the worlds of two people, right? These are people are trying to connect with one another. They're trying to engage. There is something that's the interactive nature is associated with the use of this particular phrase. And again, you asked about pedagogical implications, Dr. Rudy. I mean, that might be, we might think about how often in English for academic purposes, we might teach the phrase, you know what I mean? And I can pretty much be pretty certain that it won't appear in any of our course books. But you can see how frequently it's used. And you can see actually how important it is in relation to interactivity. So that's one of the, I suppose, you mentioned about pedagogical applications. Because corpus data and evidence will sometimes challenge our assumptions, it leads us then to change what it is that the information that informs our decisions. Right. And another, I'll go back to the PowerPoint. Just on this. I won't ask you, but please go and find and do this as a second task. This is an interesting one, actually. If you just, can we do it now? Is that all right? Am I stretching everyone's patience if I ask you to go do that now? Type in any one of those three, and I'll give you maybe 2 minutes, and then come and tell me what you find. Any one of those three. Okay. I think that was 1 minute, but ding, 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 time's up, time's up, time's up. Right, what did you find? Anyone?
No matches in no transcript. That's the result I found, Aisling.
That's it.
I get nothing as well. Could you give me an example of something like that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You're all absolutely, obviously, absolutely correct. And that's it. There are no matches. It doesn't occur. Now, clearly it goes back, clearly that's possible. It's possible, but it didn't happen. And the reason I chose those three in particular was that I conducted a study of textbooks that were supposed to teach EAP students about spoken academic English. And they had lots of phrases that as teachers, we were supposed to teach to be able to enable our students to participate in the kind of interactive speech events that we've been looking at. And none of them occurred. And I don't sort of say that to be funny or to poke fun at materials writers. I don't say that at all, because these are all possible. They're all correct. They're all, there's nothing wrong with these phrases. It's just that they don't seem to be ones that are frequently used, or in fact at all, in a corpus of American university talk. I would encourage you to, have a look at some of the different corpora that we'll have a look at and try those out. This has serious implications for the kinds for how we prepare material for English language teaching, and that's clearly where some of the big implications for corpus-based work lies. These are actually quite, students trying to learn these particular phrases. First of all, they're more than 5 words. Right, so they're quite, not only in relation to the pronunciation of them, but also in the remembering of them. So when we think about what am I if I'm going to go to the effort of teaching, and learners, more importantly, are going to go to the effort of trying to learn and trying to remember set phrases, you would want to give them the ones that are going to be the most useful. They're going to be the ones that are going to be recognized, and that is going to help them to do what it is that they want to do in an interactive context, like, for example, some of those academic speech events. So that, I think.
Excuse me, Dr. Ashley.
Yes.
Henny Prabowo just write in the chat room that the site cannot be reached after she tried it.
Oh.
And I've tried once, but it's only show the link.
Okay.
I cannot submit search. I cannot submit search.
We're maybe overloading it. I'm not entirely sure.
Or could be Wi-Fi problem.
Yeah,
because I can access it.
You can, or
yeah, I can.
You can access. Okay,
yes,
can
yes.
you show us? Because when I click submit search, it cannot show anything but just the woman.
I'm here with Budina. Budina, do you have the same problem? Because
no. Everything's
right?
okay.
Yeah, everything's okay.
I see.
So I think it's about
it's a matter of connections, I guess.
Yeah.
Connection, probably. Yeah.
But I mean, that is a really important point, actually. It can be about connection. It can also potentially be number of users on the site as well. And that, I mean, I don't think that would be
okay. Aisling, if you allow me to ask again, good question. Right. So this is about the issue of natural and not natural English. When we find, for example, there is one lexical bundle which is not quite, frequent in corpus database, can we say that it's not a natural English because it's not like readily used by native speakers of English? Like you, for example, you are not really into this kind of bundles. Can we say that because it is not natural? Because it is, like natural means when people, the native speakers of English, for example, very frequently use, certain lexical bundles. Can we relate this thing to the issue of natural and not natural English?
Okay, I'm going to just sort of highlight two things here. First of all, I want you to split the notion of naturalness and native speaker. And
Right.
there's because we know that English language users around the world, some grow up speaking English and some don't grow up speaking English, and therefore English might not be their, if they're asked, it might not be their native language, but it's the language that they give lectures in. It's the language that they participate in seminars in. So, and I think it is really, really, I understand, Udi, your question, but I think it's really important for us to split our notions that naturally occurring means it has to naturally occur out of a native speaker's mouth.
Okay.
The natural occurring means that it happened in that context and somebody did something with it. And I think that's really, really, really important, is that the whole point of corpus-based language work is it's descriptive rather than prescriptive. Okay, so it's not telling you what you should say or what you shouldn't say, which is sometimes where we go with the notion of, if we combine the notion of natural and native speaker. That's not what corpus data is about. It's about describing what happens. And you saw there from the my case that you've got speakers there who have various first languages. All right, so we probably want to be clear about the expectations that we have for corpora. There are learner corpora. Okay, and so learner corpora can map out how people use language when they are learning the language and at what stage they are learning a language, and that could be compared, for example, to more advanced speakers. So I think we'll go back to the question of what's in your corpus, who produced the data that's in it. So just because it's from don't be over assumptive, I think is kind of what I'm trying to get at. Just because it's from an American university doesn't mean that every single person there is a native speaker and that therefore that's what everybody should say. That's not at all. This is about describing the naturalness. Is very much about it happened in real life. It was, the text was produced as a result of somebody doing something. So when we looked at the shop encounters last week in Limerick corpus of Irish English, it was people going into a petrol station and paying for the petrol, please and thank you. They were doing stuff with language. And equally so when we looked at the Shakespeare texts. Now that's Shakespeare doing stuff with language, right? It's made up. Yes, it's made up. It's invented, if you like, but he's doing something with it. He's not inventing language for the sake of inventing it. He's doing it to tell you a story, to write, he's doing it to produce all the emotions and all the objectives that literary writers do. So the naturally occurring bit is about it's somebody has put language together for a purpose. And so you may then, if you think about your interpretations, well, I don't want to teach these particular examples because they don't occur in this corpus, but you might want to search another corpus where it's made up of, say, for example, English that's spoken at an English medium university in Korea. Or you might want to, and that's where we get into the fantastic area of language variation. And we can see that not just with vocabulary or lexical bundles, we can see it with grammatical constructions as well, where different varieties of English as they are spoken across the world, there are variations. There's a really good corpus called the Globe corpus. So it's a corpus of English spoken all over the world. So and it's about using language to do stuff with it. So I think a really important question, Zudi, about natural, and thank you very much for asking that, because it's really important. I've forgotten to kind of highlight that this is about description. It's not about prescription.
Right.
Thank you, Udi.
Thank you, Pak Udi. Okay, to all participants, is it okay if they have any questions? Question and answer, okay. Or do you still have?
Budian.
Budian ya belum ada. Budian belum ada suaranya ini.
I will not ask anything, but I want to Dr. Boyle to continue her explanation, because last week we haven't discussed about the tools of corpus, or selected or build the corpus data. We haven't finished the presentation last week, so I want to hear all the material.
Okay. Thank you very much. I like being told what to do. That's fine. That's good. That's good.
Interesting. So I want to hear.
So when we mentioned the tools of analysis last week as your word lists, your concordances, and your keyness.
Yeah.
And so those were your tools. But you're absolutely right. We didn't get as far as selecting or building a corpus.
Yes.
And so these are some, and I want to take you, so what comes next are, it's based on sort of 20 years of working with corpora, and it's also with coming out of a study conducted recently with a colleague where we were carrying out that systematic review of corpus-based studies. So, but as I said in their first session, it's always good to get lots of perspectives on corpus. So go, check out the different blogs and all of the different websites that I have listed. Now, selecting or building a corpus. There are loads of corpora, right? And that's just fact, and people keep building them and they are made. And that's really positive, okay? We've looked at one and there are lots of others, okay? Remember, of course, you do need a reason to be able to start off. You need a reason, okay? And remember that you might have a language focused question, or it might be something around corpus-aided text analysis. What you want to look for in a corpus, right? And these are kind of the next sort of 10 comments that I want to make are what myself and colleagues think that you should think about before you begin a corpus search when you think about selecting or building, okay? And so I'll just go through these and hopefully exemplify some of the issues here. Right. Most crucially, when you are looking at a corpus and deciding whether to choose one or not choose one, is there information about the corpus and its content? Okay. Now, when we looked at the My Case just now, we were able to see, yes, there was information about it. We knew there were 152 transcripts. We knew where it was taken from. We knew the speech event. We knew quite a lot about it. And that is essential, okay? I've presented an image here of the corpus of contemporary American English. When you click on it, there's the I button here, and that gives you full information about everything, about the principles of construction of that corpus and how it keeps on building as well, okay? It is really important that you find out how this was made and what's in it, okay? Because that's the source of your data, okay? And easily, some of the best corpus websites have that very easy to find. If you are accessing a corpus website and it's not particularly easy to find, I would think again. I really would think again. And do ask yourself yes or no. If there isn't information about it, I wouldn't be relying on it, because you can't defend, you can't say this came from, this came from, a university context, or it came from, a coffee shop or a petrol station. Right? If you don't know anything about it, there's not much that you can say about it. Next question, I think, relates a bit to what Idi was mentioning before. Think about, and I'm talking here about English, okay? So what kind of English language variety is included? And one of the things you might want to think about is what languages are included. So this is written for relation to English. We mentioned last week the child's corpus, which is it's a corpus made up lots of different types of lots of different languages, and being able to look at child data. So think about the English language variety that's included. So for example, just to point out what that means, our search of My Case was giving us access to language use in an American context, right? So we've talked a bit about, do we assume that it's American English? we could probably, you know, look at the speakers. We could probably make a kind of rough estimate that, yeah, it's looking at American English. We might want to then compare that with, say, for example, English language varieties that's spoken in the Philippines in universities there. Okay, so always think about the language variety. Question 3, really, and this is kind of working your way through this, and there are 10, all right, I'll just say that now, right? There are 10 of them, and I think they're really, really important. They're important not just to think about, but write yourself a definite answer, okay? What does this corpus represent? There's quite a lot of discussion, and as you read around some of the core texts that I've suggested, what's in a corpus, what is a corpus supposed to represent, is a sort of fundamental issue, okay? Does it include lots of examples of the different genres? Does it contain lots of different speech events? And think about what it is that you want to use that corpus for. So, for example, on its most basic level, if you're interested in looking at newspaper articles to be able to conduct a search of, you know, metaphors, something that Sippy was talking about last week, don't go to the Michigan Corpus of Academic Spoken English, right? On its most fundamental level, think about what the corpus contains, what's in it. Okay. And different corpus can contain lots of different things. Again, on the MyCase, a separate MyCase, it's MyCusp. So there's a different corpus which has a set of student essays. So it's written corpus, it's written texts, and they're all graded. So you can see, right, well, a really high grade essay looks like this, and you can compare it with medium or lower grade lesson. So what is the corpus supposed to represent? Does that match your question? So our Bs, so yay, let's go, but wait, is there a reason? If your reason matches your corpus, then yes, that's good. You're looking to select that corpus. Okay. Question 4, when were the texts included in the corpus produced? Okay, we mentioned a little last week about different types of corpora. We talked about diachronic and you know, think about when these texts were included. Are they 20 years old? Are they 40 years old? You know, a lot has happened in the last 2 years, but think about when the texts were included and is it important? Okay, just think about for your research question, when were they produced and is it important? And also again, who? Okay, who produced the texts in this corpus? Now, this is particularly important if you're looking at a big corpus, sometimes referred to as a general corpus or a reference corpus. And you can think about how the designers selected texts from different, for example, not just around gender, but also around socioeconomic background, about age. So is the corpus just made up of, you know, people from a relatively high socioeconomic background? Are the conversations in that text from city contexts and there are no rural contexts included? You know, remember, and I've probably said this a number of times, people do stuff with language and there are people behind these words. That's the whole point of them. People produce them. And so you want to think about, are the people's words that you're accessing the people that you're interested in, the people that you want their language use to be able to evidence whatever it is that you're interested in. Sorry, yeah, that was just an example there to show you about MyCase, how we do have it, we have the ability to see it broken down by male and female and roles. Another question, again, it depends on the type of on your reason for searching a corpus. What linguistic information is available? Does it tell me if I'm looking at a noun or a verb? And does it give me that for all of the languages that are represented in the corpus? Now that, again, is particularly useful for those of us interested in language teaching or improving language awareness of teachers, teacher educators. I think that is particularly useful there. I mentioned this about when the corpus was last updated, when I highlighted about the 2019 from my case. That gives you an indication of how people are monitoring the interface. Okay, it can be that they can get rid of anomalies that might happen. It can be that they're always checking that access is available, you know, that it hasn't gone under some odd virus or anything like that. And it is important because, you know, different things can be corrupted, or they can be errors can occur in data and things like that, or in the analysis that you go to run. So it's really important to bear that in mind. Question 8, now this is massive. This is really, really, really important to think about. Can you freely search the corpus? Okay. Now, many of them will say, yes, we're free. And then you hit a certain number of searches, or you want to access something, and there's a paywall can come up, right? Now, just because it's not free doesn't mean, you know, you might have to pay for it, but there might be a good reason for you to pay for it, okay? If it is free, you can think about, is it really free? Do they give you the first 100 words of the text, or do they give you the whole text? Okay, and that's really important if you're looking at whole text analysis. So you're looking at a whole episode of a speech event, a class from start to finish, rather than just the first 100 words of a class. So, you know, think about, is it worth buying if it's relevant to your research question? Okay. No, if it's not free, well, then you've got to, you know, weigh up cost, weigh up opportunities, that you know, the amount of opportunity you have versus the cost. Okay, and some searches will only allow you a certain number of searches per day. They're free, but they only allow you a number per day. Particularly if you're sharing that with students, or if you have a deadline that you have to meet and you need all of your analysis done by a certain date, be careful. They may be time bound. So just check those all out before you select a corpus. One of the most, I think, kind of fundamental things to think about when you are selecting a corpus, I think it's probably after is there enough information about what's in it, is how much guidance there is. Okay. Different corpus websites will have a different interface. Okay, so we were using my case this morning, but the Corpus of Contemporary American English has a very different interface. The principles are the same. You're searching for words, you're searching for frequency, you're looking at concordance lists, and you're looking at keyness. That they're all exactly the same. Okay, but their interfaces are a bit different. Information is presented slightly differently. But what is really important, my recommendation is, if a corpus website has got videos of how to, that is really, really useful. And the reason for that, not only does it give you a step-by-step introduction to how to do a search, or how to perform a function that you want to, but what it also means is that the person who has constructed the corpus is constantly working out any problems that there might be. And this is most evident by some ANCONC. Some of you may be familiar with ANCONC as a corpus tool. There are the originator of ANCONC, Lawrence Anthony, has produced a number of tutorials on how to get started on using corpus tools, goes through each and every corpus tool, and it's free. The software is free. But each of those videos, there are new versions. So it's the 3.4 version or the 3.5 version. So what that means is that someone is constantly taking care of that software, working out the glitches, making sure that it is as easy and accessible as it can be. And that where you have good guidance, where you have additional support in the form of videos, you can be fairly certain that that is a reliable software to use, because the glitches will be, or any of the errors or any of the difficulties that you might experience have been kind of ironed out. So that is really, really useful. Also, they're good then for troubleshooting. So if something happens and you're, why did that happen? They very often have a question and answer. Do you want to build a corpus? Well, okay, again, it's a B, you know, yay, build it. But what's your reason for it? Why are you building it? Here are some reasons why I think you should build a corpus, that you can't find anything that matches your specific needs. Okay, that's your primary reason. There may be a very specific question that you have in mind that can't be answered by any other means. It might be that you actually want to examine, you want to use corpus tools on your own set of texts or with your students. And therefore you have to, if you're using your own text, you have to build your own corpus. As I mentioned last week, when I used corpus-based tools for text analysis, so corpus-aided analysis, I had to create a text of my 40 focus groups. So it just meant having to put that, reformat the text and put the text into the corpus software, because I wanted to examine that particular set of texts. Another good reason, if you want to build a corpus, is really to get to grips with the nuts and bolts. I've used that phrase here, the nuts and bolts of a corpus. So you want to work out exactly how do you get a text from a text into a corpus, and how do you get a corpus, a text into a series of concordance lines. If you want more hands-on experience of working with corpus and understanding it, I think those are very good reasons, because you learn a lot of skill through doing that and through building it. And again, you might want to carry out research on documents and materials for specific purposes. So you might want to look at policy documents, for example. You want to create a corpus of policy documents. I understand, I know that I've been invited onto this talk, and I know you've got other exciting topics around systematic reviews and narrative inquiry. And I know that sometimes corpus-based methods can be seen as, ooh, you know, it's a trend, or it's the latest thing. Yeah. And I think there is sometimes a problem with that it's seen as trendy or fashionable. But actually, in reality, if this is something that you're interested in, the skills that you gain by creating a corpus, for example, will sustain you well beyond the fashion or a trend or a phase. So that's really, really important. I know I'm close to time, City, aren't I?
Yes, I think it's just about 5 minutes to go.
Perfect. I wanted to show you some websites, or just to show you exactly. So if you are interested in constructing your own corpus, there's a list here of different types of websites and software tools that you can access. Okay, they all look a bit different, and here I've screenshotted some of them. So this is the one I mentioned. This is Amconc, and some of you will probably be familiar with that software. You've also got something called Sketch Engine, okay, where you can build your own corpus. Wordsmith Tools, I should have possibly put these in historical order, but Wordsmith Tools, developed by Mike Scott, was probably the first sort of widely available piece of software. I have to say, it's what I started on, and it's what I use. It's what I'm happy and familiar with. But that's just a historical comment, really. And it's available here. Again, and more recently, you've got Linksbox, created from Lancaster University. Again, I'm not affiliated with any of these, so I'm not getting paid by anyone at all. But what I would say is that I know that Lancaster University, for those who want to know a bit more about corpus-based approaches and would like further advice, training, or guidance, Lancaster University runs a really successful MOOC, which again is free. It runs over a series of weeks, so it gives you time to go through things. And I would recommend it. I'm not affiliated with that or anything, but I just think it's we are sitting at home. Make sure you can access the resources that you can. One other thing just about building, always build to the principles of corpus construction, okay? It's about representativeness, it's about balance, and it's about sampling. Those are the, that is absolutely core. And I refer you back to some of those core texts that I mentioned, I think, in the second slide on our first day. Just a word of caution when you are compiling, and this is really to do with who. It's the person. You're dealing with people. Udi mentioned last week, what about the people in corpus studies? Well, don't forget people in corpus studies. Think about, do you have permission to use the text from the person who produced it? Do you know that you have? Will it be anonymous? What are the consequences? So just be, careful about that. Also in relation to transcription and annotation, regardless of whether it's spoken or written, you will have to reformat your text to a text file when you are building a corpus. And so what that means in a very basic way is that every keystroke, every mark in your text carries some meaning, okay? Or at least in relation to the software, it carries some meaning, okay? So just be very, very careful about that. Not to overload you too much, but if you want to further analysis, further quantitative analysis is absolutely possible outside of a plain corpus, some of the corpus software. And this is a really good link to a site on, again, it's Lancaster, the work of Paul Rayson, where you're able to, he has a tool here, which is really useful for you to be able to statistically compare. So going beyond descriptive statistics to inferential statistics, being able to compare frequencies across, for example, two different types of corpora to see what's significant and what's not significant. So for those of you who are interested in more quantitative analysis, that's something that you can pursue further. I'm going to pause there. I know that you all want me to stop and shut up, and I will. But if you do get a minute at some point in our busy days, take time to think about the experience that you've shared with me over the last sort of 2 weeks. I would encourage you to take minutes on your own, sort of take 5 minutes on your own to answer these questions for yourself, not for me and not for Dr. Udi or Dr. Dina, just for yourself, okay? What do you know now that you didn't before? What do you think you've gained? Can you write it down? What did you struggle with? It's really important to be, clear about what do I still not know? What do I struggle with? Do I know how to overcome that struggle? And honestly, and this is, for any research method or anything that you're thinking of spending a lot of your time, do you think it's worth it? Do you think the effort that you put in will be good for you, will do what it is that you want it to do? So I'll stop talking there and say thank you very much. I'm sorry.
Okay, to the audience. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Aisling. To the audience, can you put reactions such as give applause, thumbs up?
Thank you. Oh gosh, look at that. Oh,
love.
I put more and more reaction, love.
Yes, love, reaction, love for Aisling. This is really interesting. One thing that I remember the first time you said you need a reason. Everything what you are going to do, you need a reason. What you are going to find in the corpus, about the metadata and so on. This is really interesting, and thank you very much, Dr. Aisling. I think the participants should answer the question here. Think of it to become a great researchers. Keep on thinking, ya Pak Udi, ya. Think, find problems, and try to search every data. We got metadata in the computational, in the internet. Just grab the link that Dr. Aisling gave to us.
I think after this session, there will be more students do like corpus studies in our university.
Yes.
We've got a lot of insight.
Yes, of course. Especially for students who are going to do the scriptsy, thesis,
right,
and
thesis, yes.
in many kinds of topics, not only about being a teacher education, but also we can do some discourse analysis doing this using Corpus and classroom interaction in Indonesia. Many kind of classroom interaction that really interesting to be dig in, probably. Am I correct, Pak Udi? Dr. Aisling?
Aisling, not me.
Million thanks for Dr. Aisling. Can we give another reaction, love, or tap something?
Okay,
We do hope meet you
everything for
again.
Aisling. All.
Yes.
Okay.
I do also apologize if I made some mistakes. Oh, best regard from Ibu Dina, Dr. Aisling.
Thank you very much. Really, really appreciate that, and very happy as always to talk about anything related to corpus-based studies. And I think it is, I mean, you know, if people are interested, I think it is really important that there's space for people to share their ideas. So that might be something, if you do have people that are connected, to connect so that they can connect with each other, because I think, you know, sometimes someone's got the right answer somewhere else, and I think it can be really useful to share, and happy to do that as well. So I'll send through. So thank you very much for your patience, and it was very lovely for you to join me. I'm always delighted to see people across the screen. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Aisling. Kalau ada umurku panjang, boleh kita bertemu lagi. Sampai jumpa, Miss Dr. Aisling. And all the participants, thank you very much indeed. We'll see you again next time. Thank you, Dr. Aisling.
Thank you, Aisling. Thank you very much. Is it sunny? Is it sunny outside in Memphis? Yes. Oh, okay.
Pak Udi miss the place.
I'm sure. I missed the place.
Hopefully we can go there.
Yeah.
How can we take picture?
Yeah, sure. I think we'll do it. Pak Eko. Okay. Bisa Pak Din.
Okay, next page. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Pak Eko. Thank you to all PLE team.
Thank you
to all participants. Thank you very much, Dr. Aisling. Thank you, Pak Udi.
Yeah, thank
we'll
you.
meet you again. Have a nice day. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam. Bye. Have a good day, Aisling. Have a good day. See you on Friday.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you, Pak Udi.
Yeah. Thank you.